There's something alive down there. I can feel it. Mason Cole dropped to his knees in the middle of his field, pressed his ear flat against the cracked earth, and went completely still. His heart pounded. The tapping sound came again, 3 short beats, then silence, then 3 more. Deliberate. Human. He didn't think. He just ran for the shovel. If you've ever felt that cold certainty that something is terribly wrong, that your gut is screaming louder than your brain, then you already know exactly what Mason felt in that moment. Subscribe to our channel, hit that notification bell, and drop a comment telling us what city you are watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. Now let's go. Mason Cole hadn't heard silence like this in 40 years. Not the fake kind of silence, not the kind you get in a quiet room where you can still hear the refrigerator hum or the neighbors devout 2 streets over. This was farm silence, the kind that settles over open land like a heavy blanket just before sunset when the wind drops out and every living thing seems to take one long, slow breath before the dark comes in. He liked it. After everything, after all the years, all the noise away, all the chaos, he had earned this silence. And he protected it the way other men protected their money or their reputation. Mason was 57 years old. He stood 6'2", still broad across the shoulders, even though the years had softened the edges a little. His hands were the kind of hands that told a story without needing words, scarred across the knuckles, calloused from years of gripping a throttle, and then later from gripping a plow handle. The tattoos had blurred some over time, the ink spreading beneath the skin like old watercolors left in the rain. The winged skull on his left forearm was still recognizable if you knew what you were looking at. Most people didn't look long enough to find out. He had been out in the eastern field since 2 in the afternoon. Simple work checking the drainage ditches along the property line, making sure the recent rains hadn't shifted any of the soil around the old fence posts. Physical, mindless, necessary. The kind of work that emptied your head out completely and left you feeling clean by the end of it. He was almost done. The light was going golden, stretching long shadows across the ground, and he was maybe 20 minutes from heading back inside, washing up and fixing himself something to eat. That's when he heard it. At first he thought it was a woodpecker. The rhythm was similar, a series of quick, sharp taps followed by a pause. But woodpeckers don't tap from underground. Mason stopped walking. He tilted his head slightly to the left the way a man does when he's not sure if he's hearing something or imagining it. Silence. He took 2 more steps toward the fence line. Tap, tap, tap. There it was again. Low, muffled, like someone knocking on wood from inside a closet, coming from somewhere beneath the surface of the field, coming from the ground itself. What in the... He started, then stopped himself. He stood perfectly still for a full 30 seconds listening. The tapping came a 3rd time. Same pattern. 3 beats of pause, 3 beats. It wasn't random. It wasn't mechanical. It had intention behind it. Mason felt the hair on the back of his neck stand up in a way it hadn't in a long time. Not since the old days. Not since the years he didn't talk about anymore. He walked toward the sound, slowly, eyes down, scanning the ground. The soil here was slightly different. He could see it now that he was looking. A patch roughly 4 feet by 3 feet where the grass was thinner, the earth a little looser, almost imperceptibly darker than the surrounding ground. He crouched down and pressed his palm flat against the dirt. The tapping stopped. Then after a beat of absolute silence, it came back. Louder, faster, frantic. "Oh God!" Mason said quietly. To no one, to himself. "Oh God, oh God, oh God!" He was already running. The shed was 60 yards from where he'd been standing. He covered the distance in under 20 seconds, moving at a pace that would have surprised anyone who saw him. Not the lumbering run of an old man, but something that still carried the muscle memory of urgency. He grabbed the long-handled spade from its hook on the wall without stopping and turned back for the field. His mind was doing 2 things at once. The practical part, the farm part, the careful, methodical part he'd built over the last 12 years, was running through logical explanations. Gas pipe, an old drainage tunnel, some kind of animal burrow. A badger maybe, or a groundhog. The soil shifted sometimes. Things could make all kinds of sounds. But the other part, the older part, the part that had kept him alive through situations that still showed up in his nightmares, That part wasn't entertaining any of those explanations. That part already knew. Someone was down there. He hit the spot at full stride and dropped to his knees beside the patch of dark earth. He pressed his ear to the ground again. Tap, tap, tap. Hey, he shouted at the ground. His own voice shocked him, rough and loud in the evening quiet. Hey, can you hear me? The tapping stopped. Then a sound came back, muffled almost beyond recognition, barely audible through the packed earth and whatever was below it, but unmistakable. A voice, high-pitched, thin, a child's voice. Mason Cole had survived bar fights and knife fights in situations where serious men with serious intentions had made it very clear they meant to put him in the ground permanently. He had ridden through 3 different states with federal agents behind him, had watched men he called brothers go to prison, and some go to graveyards, had done things he would carry with him every day until he died. He had never, not once in his life, felt fear the way he felt it in that moment, because this was a different kind of fear entirely. This wasn't the fear of his own death. This was something much, much worse. He started digging. So, the first foot went fast. The soil was loose, recently disturbed, he realized now, with a cold clarity, and it gave way easily beneath the blade of the spade. He worked with both hands, throwing dirt wide, not caring about the mess or the effort or the fact that his shoulders were already burning. I'm here, he shouted as he dug. I can hear you. I'm coming. Okay, I'm coming right now. You stay with me. He wasn't sure if the voice could hear him. He wasn't sure of anything except the rhythm of the shovel and the sound of his own breathing and the desperate prayer running on a loop somewhere in the back of his mind. Please be alive. Please be alive. Please still be alive. The spade hit something solid at about 18 inches down. He dropped to his knees and started pulling dirt away with his hands feeling the edges of what was beneath. Wood, rough-cut planks nailed together. A box, a crate of some kind. Are you in there? He called out, his face inches from the dirt. Can you hear me? Bang, bang, bang. 3 hard thumps on the wood from inside. Okay, his voice cracked. He steadied it. Okay, I've got you. You hear me? I've got you. I need you to move away from the top if you can. Get back. I'm going to open this up. He worked the spade under the edge of the lid and leaned his weight into it. The wood was old. The nails were rusted, but they'd been hammered deep. It took 3 tries before the first corner came up with a shriek of metal and splintering wood. Almost there, he called out. Almost. Hold on. The second corner came up easier. Then the third. He got his fingers under the edge of the lid and pulled upward with everything he had, his arms shaking, his back screaming. The lid came off. And Mason Cole looked down into the hole. What he saw in that moment, the image of it would stay with him for the rest of his life. It would be the first thing he thought of every morning and the last thing before he closed his eyes at night. Not because it was the worst thing he had ever seen. He had seen worse. He knew that. He knew that in the cold, honest part of himself. But it was the most wrong thing he had ever seen. Wrong in a way that went beyond logic or language. A little girl, 7, maybe 8 years old, curled up in the bottom of the crate with her knees pulled to her chest and her arms wrapped around herself. Dirt on her face, on her hair, on the pale yellow dress she was wearing, a dress that might have been pretty once before whoever did this had put her in the ground. Her eyes were open. That was the first thing he really registered. Her eyes were open, and they were looking up at him with an expression so complicated it took his brain several seconds to process it. Terror and exhaustion and something like relief all layered on top of each other in a way that no child's face should ever have to hold. She didn't make a sound. She just looked at him. Hey, Mason said. His voice came out barely above a whisper. Hey, little one, I've got you. You're okay. I've got you now. She opened her mouth. No words came out. Just a small, broken sound, like she had been crying so long she had run out of it. He reached down into the hole and lifted her out, and she didn't resist. She came up limp and light in his arms, and he held her against his chest and just stood there for a moment in the middle of his field, with the last light of the sun going out behind the trees and the weight of her in his arms, and the feeling that his whole world had just shifted in a way he didn't have a name for yet. I've got you, he said. Again, it was the only thing he could think of to say. He carried her back to the house at a run. She didn't say anything during those 60 seconds. She didn't cry. She pressed her face against his chest and gripped the front of his flannel shirt with both hands, tiny fists, white-knuckled, and held on. He pushed through the front door and went straight for the kitchen table, setting her down as gently as he could manage. She didn't let go of his shirt. "Okay, well," he said, kneeling down in front of her so they were eye level. "I need you to let go for just 1 second. Okay, just 1 second. I need to get you some water." Her eyes tracked his face, processing, evaluating, making some calculation that only she could see. Then slowly her fingers released their grip on his shirt. He grabbed a glass from the cabinet and filled it from the tap and brought it back. He put it in her hands and held them steady and watched her drink. She drank the whole glass without stopping, then held the empty glass in her lap and stared at it. "Can you tell me your name?" Mason asked quietly. She didn't answer right away. Her eyes were glazed, going in and out of focus. Dehydration, he thought. Shock. How long had she been down there? How long had she been... "Lily," she said. Her voice was barely there, rough and small. "Lily," he repeated. "That's a beautiful name. My name is Mason. I'm not going to hurt you, Lily. You're safe now. Do you understand that?" "You are safe," she looked at him. Something moved behind her eyes, something painful. "They said that before," she whispered. The words hit him like a fist. "Who said that?" he asked. He kept his voice level with tremendous effort. "Who are they?" "Lily, can you tell me?" She shook her head. Her lower lip was trembling. "Okay," he said. "That's okay. You don't have to tell me right now. That's okay." He reached for the phone on the counter and dialed 911. 911, what is your emergency?" "I need an ambulance at 4712 County Road 9 Harding Township. I found a child buried on my property. She's alive. She's conscious. She needs medical attention immediately." A pause on the other end. "Then I'm sorry, sir. Can you repeat that?" "A child buried in a wooden box on my farm. She's out now. She's alive. But I need an ambulance here in the next 5 minutes." Another pause. Longer this time. "Sir, are you saying..." "I'm saying exactly what I said. A little girl buried in my field. Get someone out here. Now." He gave them his address again slowly and clearly and hung up before they could ask him another question he didn't have the patience for. He turned back to Lily. She was looking at him with those eyes again, those ancient, complicated eyes in a child's face, and she said something so quiet he had to lean forward to hear it. "Are you one of them?" she whispered. He went very still. "One of who?" he asked. She looked down at his forearm, at the blurred tattoo, at the winged skull that had faded but never fully disappeared. "The men who came to our house," she said, "they had pictures like that." Mason Cole did not move for a long moment. Then he sat down heavily in the chair across from her, and he looked at his own arm, and he said nothing at all. He heard the distant sound of the ambulance maybe 15 minutes later, the faint wail of it cutting through the evening air from somewhere down the county road. But those 15 minutes had been the longest of his life. He had done his best to keep Lily calm. He had found a blanket and wrapped it around her shoulders. He had refilled her water glass and brought crackers from the cabinet, the only thing he thought she might be able to keep down. He had talked to her not about anything important, not about anything that touched on what she'd just told him, just talked the way you talk to a person who is teetering on an edge and needs to hear a steady voice to keep their footing. He told her about the farm, about the chickens he kept out back, about a dog he'd had once, a big, dopey golden retriever named Earl, who used to chase his own shadow in circles for 20 minutes at a time and never once caught it. He watched her face as he talked, and after a while, not much. Just a little, some of the rigidity went out of her small body, and she leaned back slightly against the table, and he counted that as a victory. But in the back of his mind, behind every word he said and every careful breath he took, one thought was running on a constant loop. Tattoos, leather vests, men on motorcycles. He knew what she was describing. He had known it the moment she looked at his arm. The question that was eating him alive, the question he couldn't answer and couldn't stop asking, was not whether the people who did this were from his world. He already knew they were. The question was, which ones? The paramedics came through his front door 2 minutes after he unlocked it, two of them moving fast with their bags, and they went straight to Lily with the practiced efficiency of people who have seen things and learned to keep moving through them. Mason stood back and let them work. The deputy arrived 3 minutes after that. Young guy, mid-20s maybe. Dark uniform, wide eyes, the look of a man who had been told what he was driving to and still wasn't quite believing it. "Sir," the deputy said, stopping in front of Mason. "Deputy Haynes, are you the one who called?" "Yeah. You found the child on your property." "In my east field, buried about 18 inches down in a wooden crate." Mason kept his voice flat and factual. "The soil had been disturbed recently. She was tapping on the wood. That's how I heard her." The deputy looked at him for a long moment. Then he looked at the girl, then back at Mason. "And you have no idea how she got there?" the deputy asked. His tone was careful, neutral, the tone of a man asking an open question with his hand close to his notepad. "No," Mason said, "I don't." "How long have you been on the property today?" "Since about 2, working the drainage ditches near the east fence line." "And you didn't notice anything earlier? No vehicles on the property, no activity near that area of the field?" "Nothing." The deputy wrote something down. "Can I get your full name, sir?" "Mason Cole." Another pause. The pen hovered over the notepad. "Any ID?" Mason reached into his back pocket and pulled out his wallet and handed over his driver's license without being asked for it. The deputy looked at it, looked at him, looked at the tattoo. "Mr. Cole," he said slowly, "is there anything else you want to tell me right now? Anything at all?" Mason looked across the kitchen at Lily. One of the paramedics had her hand. The other was checking her pulse. She was looking back at Mason over the paramedic's shoulder. Her eyes were still doing that thing, still carrying that weight. "Yeah," Mason said quietly. He turned back to the deputy. "I think there's a whole lot I need to tell you, but I need to tell it right. So I'm going to need you to sit down." The deputy pulled out a chair. Mason sat across from him at the table where 15 minutes ago he had been feeding crackers to a child he'd pulled out of his own earth, and he took one slow breath and he began. He didn't tell the deputy everything. Not yet. He told him the facts, the sound, the digging, the crate, the call to 911. He told him about Lily's description. He was careful and precise because he had learned a long time ago that the difference between a useful conversation with law enforcement and a disastrous one was almost always in the precision of what you said and the deliberate omission of what you weren't ready to hand over yet. What he didn't say, what he held back like a stone in his chest, was that he recognized the description. That when Lily said tattoos and leather vests, a face had come into his mind immediately. Not one face, 3. He knew who these men were. The deputy finished writing and stood up. "We're going to need to secure the scene in your east field. Can you show us the location?" "Yeah," Mason said. "I can show you." He stood up. And as he did, his eye caught something on the kitchen table that he hadn't noticed before, something small and bright that must have fallen from Lily's dress when he'd set her down. A silver locket, oval-shaped on a thin chain. He almost left it. Almost. Something made him pick it up. He turned it over in his fingers. It was engraved on the back, just 3 letters in a simple serif font. LMK. He opened the clasp. Inside were 2 photographs, the small oval kind, fitted into the inside of the locket. On the left, a family portrait. A man, a woman, a little girl he recognized immediately as Lily. They were smiling. All 3 of them genuinely, fully smiling the way people smile when they don't know that anything is about to go wrong. On the right side of the locket was a photograph that made Mason's blood go cold. 3 men, standing in front of a row of motorcycles, arms around each other's shoulders, grinning. He knew all 3 of their faces. He had ridden with all 3 of them for 8 years. He stood there in his kitchen with the locket in his hand and the deputy waiting at the door and Lily being loaded onto a stretcher 20 feet away. And he understood, with a clarity so sharp it was almost like pain, that the life he had built here, the quiet and the silence, and the 12 years of careful distance between himself and everything that had come before was over. Whatever was coming next had already started. The only question was whether he was going to walk into it or let it come to him. Mason Cole closed the locket in his fist. He had never been the kind of man who waited. He followed the deputy outside. The east field looked different at night, with law enforcement flashlights cutting across it. Mason stood back and watched 2 deputies and a crime scene technician work the area around the crate, and he kept his fist closed around the locket in his jacket pocket, and he said absolutely nothing about it. That was a decision he'd made in the space between picking it up off the table and walking out the front door. A split-second calculation, the kind he used to make constantly back in the old days. The kind where you weigh what you know against what you're not yet ready to hand over, and you decide which one protects the people who need protecting. Right now, the only person Mason cared about protecting was Lily. And handing that locket to Deputy Haynes, a 20-something kid who didn't know the difference between the Hells Angels and a church choir, wasn't going to help Lily. It was going to complicate things in ways Mason couldn't control. He needed to control this, at least for a little while longer. "Mr. Cole," Deputy Haynes appeared at his elbow. "The child is being transported to Mercy General. She's stable, but they want to evaluate her for dehydration and possible exposure." "How long was she down there?" Mason asked. "We don't know yet. She hasn't been able to tell us much. She gave us a first name, Lily, but nothing else." Haynes paused. "She asked about you, though." Mason turned to look at him. "What do you mean?" "When they were loading her into the ambulance, she asked the paramedic if you were coming." Haynes studied him carefully. "She seems to trust you." "She doesn't have any reason to distrust me," Mason said. "I'm the one who pulled her out of the ground." "Yes, sir." Another long pause. "I'm going to need you to come in tomorrow morning and give a full statement. Detective Reyes will be handling the case from here." "Detective Reyes," Mason repeated. He filed the name away. "Yes, sir, 8 o'clock if that works." "It works," Mason said. He watched the flashlights moving across his field for another 10 minutes. Then he went inside, sat down at the kitchen table, opened the locket again, and looked at the 3 faces he hadn't seen in 12 years. The first man was Danny Rourke. Big, loud Danny with the red beard and the laugh you could hear from 3 blocks away. The second was a man they called Priest. Nobody used his real name, not even his mother probably. Quiet, methodical, the kind of man who never raised his voice because he never needed to. The third was Tommy Vega, who was the youngest of the 3 and had been, in Mason's estimation, the most dangerous, not because of his size or his skill, but because of the particular emptiness behind his eyes when things turned serious. Mason had ridden with these men. He had trusted these men. He had at certain points in his life considered them brothers in the truest sense of the word, men. You would take a bullet for men. You would stand in front of a judge for men whose children you would hold at their christenings. He stared at their faces for a long time. "What did you do?" he said quietly to the photograph. "What in God's name did you do?" He closed the locket and put it in his shirt pocket, close to his chest. Then he picked up the phone and made a call. He'd been dreading for 12 years. It rang 4 times. 5. He was about to hang up when it picked up. "Hello," a woman's voice, cautious. "Ruth?" Mason said. "It's Mason Cole." Silence. Then Mason. Her voice shifted, something complicated moving through it. "It's been God. It's been a long time. I know. I'm sorry for calling this late. Something wrong." "Everything," Mason thought. "I need to get a message to someone in the club. I need to talk to Garrett." Another silence. Longer this time. Ruth was Garrett Bishop's wife, had been for 23 years, and she was a smart woman who knew exactly what it meant when men from the old world called in the middle of the night asking for her husband. "Mason," she said slowly. "Garrett's not—" "Ruth, please, it's important. It's about Danny Rourke and Priest and Tommy Vega. Something happened tonight that they need to know about. Something that's going to bring a lot of heat down, and I need to talk to Garrett before it gets out of hand." He heard her breathing on the other end of the line. He could almost hear her deciding. "Give me 10 minutes, she said, and hung up. Mason set the phone down on the table. He sat and he waited and he listened to the sounds of law enforcement working his field outside his window, and he thought about Lily's face and the way she looked at his tattoo, and he thought about the locket, and he thought about the family in that photograph, the smiling man and woman who were not smiling anymore, who were, he was increasingly certain, not anything anymore. The phone rang at exactly the 9-minute mark. He picked it up. "Garrett." "Mason Cole." The voice was deeper than he remembered, rougher. But the authority in it was exactly the same, that particular weight that some men carried in their voices, the kind that made other men go quiet without quite knowing why. "It's been a long time, brother." 12 years, Mason said. 12 years, Garrett agreed. "You couldn't call to say hello, had to wait for a crisis." Is that what this is? You tell me. You're the one who called. Mason laid it out. All of it, the sound, the girl, the crate, the deputies in his field right now. He left out the locket. He wasn't sure why exactly. Some instinct he'd learned to trust, even when he couldn't name it. When he finished, there was a silence on Garrett's end that stretched long enough to become its own kind of answer. Garrett, Mason said, talk to me. I'm thinking, Garrett said. Think out loud. Another pause. Then, how sure are you about what she said, the tattoos, the vests? She's a kid, Mason. Kids see what they're scared of. She might have been. She looked at my arm, Mason said quietly. She recognized it. She wasn't guessing. The silence came back, different this time, heavier. Garrett. Mason's voice dropped to something very controlled and very serious. If Danny or Priest or Tommy had anything to do with this, I need to know. Right now, tonight. Because the police are going to find out eventually, and when they do, it's not just those three who take the fall. It lands on the whole club. You don't know it was them, Garrett said. No, I don't. That's why I'm calling you. And if it was, then you tell me, and we figure out how to handle it the right way. Another long pause. Then Garrett said something that Mason hadn't expected. Something that turned the whole conversation sideways. Danny Rourke is dead, Mason. The kitchen went very quiet. What? Mason said. 3 weeks ago, found in the river outside Clarksburg. Official ruling was accidental drowning, but Garrett stopped. But what? But nobody who knew Danny thinks he fell in a river by accident. Danny Rourke didn't stumble. Not ever. In 20 years, I never saw that man lose his footing. Mason stood up from the table. He walked to the window. Outside, the flashlights were still moving across his field. And Priest dropped off the radar about a month ago. Missed 2 chapter meetings, didn't answer calls. We sent someone to his place. Empty. A pause. Tommy Vega is around, still showing up, still talking, but Garrett paused again, and Mason could hear him choosing his words. He's different, Mason. The last few months, jumpy, angry in a different way than he used to be. Garrett, Mason said, someone buried a little girl on my property. Someone who knew what they were doing, knew how to cover it, knew how to make it look like nothing from the surface. And that little girl described members of your club. My club, Mason, you were a member for 11 years. Past tense, Mason said, which means I'm outside this looking in, and what I'm seeing doesn't look good. Now I'm asking you one more time. Do you know anything about a family being attacked, a man and woman killed, a child taken? The silence this time was so complete that Mason actually pulled the phone from his ear to check the connection. Then Garrett said very quietly, come meet me. Tomorrow night, the old Hennessy warehouse off Route 7. Come alone. Garrett, I'm not saying another word on the phone, Mason. Come meet me and I'll tell you everything I know, all of it. The line went dead. Mason stood at the window with the phone in his hand and looked out at the lights moving across his field, and he thought about everything Garrett had just said and everything he hadn't. Danny Rourke was dead. Priest was gone. Tommy Vega was acting like a man with something very wrong on his conscience. And someone had buried a little girl in Mason Cole's field. Not a random field, not some abandoned lot somewhere. His field, his property, his name on the deed. The cold clarity of that settled over him like ice water. This wasn't random. Whoever had done this had known exactly where Mason Cole lived. They had chosen his property deliberately, which meant one of 2 things. Either someone wanted Lily found, and Mason was the man they trusted to find her, or someone was setting Mason up. He wasn't sure which possibility frightened him more. He put the phone in his pocket and went to get his keys. He drove to Mercy General in 35 minutes, which was 5 minutes faster than the posted speed limits technically allowed. He parked and went straight to the emergency desk and gave Lily's name. The nurse looked at him with a particular expression that nurses reserve for situations where they're not sure if the person standing in front of them is safe. Are you family? She asked. No, Mason said. I'm the one who found her. She was asking for me. The nurse made a call, a short, quiet conversation. Then she looked up and said, she's been moved to pediatric, room 214. There's a social worker with her, a Ms. Dawson. She'll need to approve any visit. Thank you, Mason said. He was already heading for the elevator. Ms. Dawson was waiting in the hallway outside room 214 when he stepped off the elevator, as well she'd been warned he was coming, which she had. She was a compact woman in her mid-40s with a calm, watchful quality about her that Mason recognized. She'd seen things, the kind of things that other people turned away from. "Mr. Cole," she said, "not quite a question. Ms. Dawson." He stopped a respectful distance from the door. "How is she?" "Dehydrated, mild hypothermia, some bruising on her wrists and ankles." A pause. "She's going to be okay physically." Physically. The word sat between them with all its implications. "She's been asking for you," Ms. Dawson said, "which is unusual given the circumstances." "I pulled her out of the ground," Mason said. "She doesn't have anyone else right now." Ms. Dawson studied him for a long moment with those watchful eyes. Then she stepped aside. "10 minutes," she said. "I'll be right here." Mason pushed the door open. Lily was sitting up in the hospital bed with a thin blanket pulled to her waist and an IV line running into her left arm. Someone had cleaned her up. Her face was washed, her hair combed. She looked smaller in the bed than she had in his kitchen, more fragile. But her eyes were sharper than they'd been an hour ago. Whatever was coming back as the dehydration lifted, it included alertness. She looked at him when he came in, and something in her expression shifted, not relief exactly, but something adjacent to it. "You came," she said. "I came," he agreed. He pulled the chair to the bedside and sat down. "How are you feeling?" She considered the question with the seriousness of a child who had learned that questions deserved real answers. "My head hurts," she said, "and my wrists." She looked down at them. Someone had wrapped them in soft gauze where the chafing was worst. "I know," Mason said. "They're taking care of you." "Are you going to leave?" she asked. "Not for a while," he said. "I want to talk to you a little if that's okay, if you're up to it." She nodded solemn. "Lily saw 'em," he said carefully. "The men who came to your house. Can you tell me anything about them? Anything at all, what they looked like, what they said, anything you remember?" She was quiet for a moment. Her small hands worked at the edge of the blanket, folding and unfolding a corner of it. "There were 3, she said. 2 big ones and 1 skinny one." "Okay," Mason said quietly. "The skinny one did most of the talking. He talked to my dad. They were outside. I was watching from the window." Her voice was very flat and factual, the way children sometimes go flat when they're talking about things that are too large for emotion. "My dad he was scared. I could tell. He was talking to the skinny one and his hands were shaking." "Did you hear what they said?" She shook her head. "I couldn't hear the words. But then my dad came inside and he looked different. He looked the way he looked when he told me my grandpa died." She folded the blanket corner again. "He told my mom something and she started crying. And then he came and found me and he held me really tight and he said, 'Lilybug, no matter what happens, you remember that Daddy loves you more than anything in the world.'" Mason said nothing. He sat very still. "And then the skinny man knocked on the door again," Lily said. Her voice dropped to nearly nothing. "And Daddy opened it, and I heard my mom scream, and then I ran." "You ran," Mason said. "I ran out the back, like Daddy always told me to. If something bad happens, you run out the back, and you go to the Hendersons' farm. That's what he always said. But I didn't get to the Hendersons." She stopped. Her jaw tightened in a way that looked heartbreaking on a child's face. "The skinny man, he was faster." The room was very quiet. "Lily, wow," Mason said. "The skinny man. Do you remember anything about him? Anything specific?" She thought about it. "Then he had a ring on his right hand, a big silver ring with a skull on it. I saw it when he grabbed my arm." Tommy Vega. Mason knew the ring. He had watched Tommy buy it at a market stall in Daytona 15 years ago, had given him grief about it for months afterward. Tommy had worn it every single day without exception. A thick silver band with a winged skull, identical to the tattoo on Mason's forearm. "Mr. Mason," Lily said. He looked up at her. "Are my mom and dad?" She stopped, started again. "Are they coming to get me?" He looked at her face, at the eyes that already knew, that had probably known since she ran out that back door and didn't make it to the Henderson. Children knew these things. They knew before they let themselves know. He didn't lie to her. He couldn't do it. "I don't know yet," he said. It was the most honest thing he could offer. But I'm going to find out. And whatever happens, Lily, I'm going to make sure you're safe. You understand me?" She looked at him for a long time. Then she nodded once and went back to folding the corner of the blanket. He sat with her until she fell asleep, which took less than 10 minutes. Her body had been through more than it should have been able to handle, and the moment she stopped fighting it, the exhaustion claimed her completely. He stood up carefully and went back into the hallway. Ms. Dawson was waiting exactly where he'd left her. She described one of the men, Mason said quietly, the one who grabbed her, a silver skull ring on the right hand. She saw Dawson's eyes sharpened. "That's more than she's told us. She's been almost completely nonverbal since the ambulance." "She trusted me enough to talk," Mason said. "It wasn't a boast, just a fact." "Mr. Cole," Ms. Dawson stepped slightly closer, lowering her voice. "The detective on this case, Reyes, she's going to want to talk to you again in the morning. Not just for a statement. She's going to have questions about your background." "I figured," Mason said. "Your history with the Hells Angels is a matter of public record." "I know what's on my record," Mason said flatly. "All of it. I also know the difference between being in that world and bearing a child. I didn't put her there." "I know," Miss Dawson said. And she said it in a way that seemed genuine, not the careful professional neutrality he'd expected. He looked at her. "You believe me." "She called for you," Miss Dawson said simply. "In my experience, children this young, they don't call for people they aren't sure of." He nodded, looked at the closed door of room 214, then back at Ms. Dawson. "Make sure nobody goes in or out of that room that you don't personally know," he said. "Nobody who isn't hospital staff or law enforcement with identification. Can you do that?" She frowned slightly. "Do you have reason to think she's in danger here?" "I have reason to think someone buried her in a field to keep her quiet," Mason said. "And she's not quiet anymore. So yes, I have reason." Ms. Dawson's face went carefully still. Then she reached for the phone clipped to her belt. "I'll call security." "Good," Mason said. He buttoned his jacket. His fingers brushed the locket in his breast pocket as though he did it. "Tell Detective Reyes I'll be at the station at 8, and tell her I have information she's going to want to hear." He walked to the elevator, pressed the button, waited. In the reflection of the metal elevator doors, he could see himself. The broad shoulders, the weathered face, the blurred tattoo on the forearm where his jacket sleeve had ridden up. He looked like what he was, a man from a hard world trying to stand between something innocent and the darkness he'd spent 12 years running away from. He was not running anymore. The elevator opened. He stepped in. Somewhere across town, Tommy Vega was doing whatever men did when they thought their tracks were covered. Eating dinner, maybe. Watching television. Sleeping soundly. Mason rode the elevator down in silence. Tommy Vega was not going to sleep soundly for very much longer. He drove back to the farm at midnight with every light in his head blazing. The meeting with Garrett was set for tomorrow night. The statement with Detective Reyes was set for 8 in the morning. That gave him roughly 7 hours to figure out exactly how much of what he knew he was willing to hand over and how much he needed to hold back, because in his experience, those two things were never the same number, and getting the balance wrong had consequences that went far beyond what any courtroom could sort out. He pulled up to the house and sat in the truck for a moment without getting out. The crime scene tape was still up at the edge of the east field. A single deputy's cruiser sat parked at the fence line, its parking lights on the deputy inside it either awake or asleep. Mason couldn't tell from here and didn't particularly care. What he cared about was the fact that his property was now a crime scene, that a little girl was in a hospital bed 12 miles away with gauze on her wrists, and that Tommy Vega, a man Mason had once trusted with his life, was somewhere out there wearing a silver skull ring and thinking he'd gotten away clean. He got out of the truck and went inside. He didn't sleep. He sat at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee that went cold and untouched, and he went through everything he knew in the slow, methodical way he'd learned to think through problems back when the problems were the kind that got you killed if you reasoned them wrong. He laid it out in his mind like cards on a table, one by one. Danny Rourke was dead 3 weeks ago in a river in a manner that nobody who knew him believed was accidental. Priest had vanished. Tommy was still present, still visible, still operating, but changed in ways that Garrett had noticed and couldn't quite name. A family had been attacked. A child had been buried on Mason's land, not randomly but deliberately, with the specific intention that either she would never be found or that when she was Mason Cole's name would be the first one in the frame. He turned the locket over in his fingers on the table. The photograph inside it was the detail that didn't fit any clean theory. If this was a setup, if someone wanted Mason caught holding responsibility for what happened to Lily's family, then why leave evidence that pointed to other members of the club? A smart setup would point everything at Mason and nothing else. But the locket pointed outward. It pointed at Danny and Priest and Tommy right there in black and white, clear as daylight, which meant either this was more complicated than a setup, or the person who planted it wasn't as smart as they thought they were. Or, and this was the possibility that kept pulling at the back of his mind like a fishhook, Lily's father had put the locket in her dress on purpose, knowing what was coming, knowing that if his daughter survived, she was going to need more than her word against powerful men. She was going to need evidence. A father's last desperate act, a photograph tucked into a piece of jewelry small enough to miss, given to the one person they couldn't silence in time. Mason opened the locket again and looked at the family photograph. The man's face, 30s maybe, strong jaw, kind eyes. The kind of face that belonged to a man who coached Little League and fixed his neighbor's fence posts when they couldn't afford to hire someone. A completely ordinary face. A face that had absolutely no business being in the same story as the Hells Angels. Who were you, Mason thought, and what did you know? He closed the locket, pressed it in his palm, and that was when it came to him, the thing he should have thought of 2 hours ago, the thing that had been sitting right in front of him the whole time. The initials on the back, LMK, those weren't Lily's initials. Lily's last name was unknown, she hadn't told anyone yet, and in her state no one had pushed. LMK belonged to whoever the locket had originally been made for. A woman probably, given the style of it, Lily's mother. And if he had a full name, even initials to work from, he had a thread to pull. He went to his laptop. It took him 4 search attempts and 40 minutes of working through county records databases he probably shouldn't have known how to access, but did because some skills from the old life were harder to leave behind than others. But at 1:47 in the morning, he found it. A property record. A farmstead about 19 miles northeast, registered to a Leonard Marcus Kowalski. Wife listed as Margaret Kowalski. 1 minor dependent. He stared at the screen. Then he picked up the phone and called Garrett back. It rang twice. "It's the middle of the night, Mason." "Leonard Kowalski," Mason said. "Ring any bells?" Silence. Then, and this was the thing that confirmed everything, Garrett's breathing changed, just slightly, just enough. "Garrett," Mason said. "Leonard Kowalski, yes or no?" "Where did you get that name?" Garrett asked. His voice had dropped to something carefully controlled. "Does it matter? Mason. Yes or no, Garrett, right now." A long pause. Then he was a federal witness. 18 months ago, the Bureau put together a RICO case against 3 of our guys, not chapter leadership, just members acting independently. Kowalski was the linchpin. He'd done business with them, saw things he shouldn't have seen, agreed to testify. Garrett paused. "The case fell apart 8 months ago. Witnesses recanted, evidence went missing. We thought it was over." "Apparently someone didn't," Mason said. Another silence. But this one had a different texture to it. This one sounded like a man confronting something he'd been trying not to see. "Garrett," Mason said carefully, "who knew where Kowalski was relocated?" "That's a federal question, Mason. We didn't know. Nobody in the club knew where he ended up. That's the whole point of witness protection." "Except someone found him," Mason said. 19 miles from my farm, and then someone buried his daughter in my field." The silence that followed was the longest yet. "Garrett," Mason's voice went quiet and hard. "I'm going to ask you something, and I need the truth. Not the version you'd tell a lawyer. The truth. Is there anyone in the club, anyone at all with enough connection to the Bureau to get access to a protected witness's location?" He heard Garrett take a slow breath. "There's been talk," Garrett said. "For about a year. Talk that someone is feeding information from inside. Getting things dropped, getting locations. We didn't know who and we didn't know how, and he stopped. Then Tommy Vega's brother-in-law works federal contracting. IT systems. He's been under internal review for 6 months." Mason stood up from the table so fast the chair scraped backward across the floor. "And you didn't think this was relevant information to share before tonight," he said. Mason, it was internal. We were handling it. Handling it. He almost laughed. A man and his wife are dead and their daughter spent God knows how long in a box underground, and you were handling it. I didn't know about Kowalski, Garrett said sharply. I didn't know any of this connected. How would I? Because Danny Rourke is dead, Mason said. Because Priest disappeared. Because Tommy is acting like a man who's done something he can't take back. How many signs did you need, Garrett? Garrett said nothing. I'm meeting with Detective Reyes in 6 hours, Mason said. I'm going to tell her what I know. I wanted you to hear that from me before she comes knocking on your door because whatever else happened between us, you deserve that much. Mason, I'm also going to that warehouse tomorrow night, Mason said, because you said you'd tell me everything. And I'm holding you to it. But if I walk in there and it's anything other than a conversation, Garrett, if there's anyone there other than you, I will burn the whole thing down. Every name, every connection, everything I know. You understand me? I understand you, Garrett said quietly. Good. Mason hung up. He stood in the middle of his kitchen and breathed. His hands were steady. He'd always had steady hands in a crisis. It was one of the things that had made him valuable in the old days, and one of the things he had never quite managed to feel good about since. He looked at the clock. 5 hours until he needed to be at the station. He wasn't going to sleep. He knew that. So instead, he went to the closet in the back bedroom and pulled down the locked metal box from the top shelf and opened it with the small key he kept on his keychain and looked at what was inside. His old journal, the one he'd kept during the last 3 years of his time with the club, a habit he'd picked up from a counselor he'd seen briefly in his mid-40s. Names, dates, incidents. Things he'd witnessed, things he'd been told. He'd kept it as insurance in the way that every man who lived that life kept some form of insurance because trust was currency and you never let anyone hold all of yours. He sat down with the journal and started going through it, looking for Tommy Vega's name, looking for anything that connected Tommy to federal informants, to witness locations, to the kind of operation that could reach into a protection program and pull out an address. He found more than he expected. Notes from a conversation in 2011 at a bar in Columbus, where Tommy had talked too casually, too loosely, about knowing a guy who could make paper disappear. A name he'd dropped once, Carver. Federal employee, IT security. Mason had written it down at the time without knowing why. He knew why now. At 6 a.m., he put the journal in his jacket pocket. At 7:45, he walked into the county police department and asked for Detective Reyes. She was not what he expected. He'd built a picture in his mind on the drive over the standard issue detective mid-40s, slightly tired and the kind of competent professional who had seen enough to be difficult to surprise. What he got instead was a woman who couldn't have been more than 38, sharp-faced with dark eyes that evaluated him with an efficiency he immediately respected. She shook his hand and led him to an interview room without any preamble, which he also respected. Mr. Cole, she said, sitting across from him, I've read your file. Then you know most of the highlights, Mason said. Former member of the Hells Angels Buckeye chapter. 11 years. Left the club in 2013. No criminal convictions, though your name appears in 3 federal investigations as a person of interest, never charged, never arrested. She set a folder on the table between them. Clean record since you left. Farm purchase in 2014. No incidents. That's accurate, Mason said. Can you explain to me why a former Hells Angel is living 19 miles from a protected federal witness? She asked. Flat direct, no cushioning on it. I didn't know he was there, Mason said equally flat. I bought this farm in 2014 because it was available and affordable, and I wanted out of everything I'd been in. I didn't choose it based on proximity to anyone. Reyes looked at him for a long moment. You said last night you had information. I do. He reached into his jacket and pulled out 2 things, the locket and the journal. He set them both on the table. Reyes looked at them without touching them. Then she looked at him. The locket came from your property. It was in my kitchen. It fell from the girl's dress when I brought her in. I should have given it to Deputy Haynes last night. I'm giving it to you now. You withheld evidence from a crime scene, Reyes said. I made a judgment call. It's on the table now. He met her eyes. Open it. She pulled on a latex glove from her jacket pocket. She'd come prepared for exactly this. He noted and picked up the locket and opened it. He watched her face as she looked at the photographs inside. A slight tightening around the eyes. Nothing more. She was good. You recognize these men, she said. Not a question. Daniel Rourke, known as Danny, deceased approximately 3 weeks ago, Clarksburg, ruled accidental drowning. He kept his voice level and factual. The second man is Robert Eames, known in the club as Priest. Current whereabouts unknown, he dropped off the radar approximately 1 month ago. The third man is Thomas Vega, active member, Buckeye chapter. Current whereabouts known to his chapter leadership. Reyes was very still. And the connection to the Kowalski family. Mason blinked. You know the name. Leonard Kowalski was a federal witness in a RICO case, she said. We received a notification from the U.S. Marshals 48 minutes ago. Leonard and Margaret Kowalski were found deceased at their property this morning. Gunshot wounds, estimated time of death approximately 3 days ago. She kept her eyes on his. The Marshals are very interested in talking to you, Mr. Cole. The room went very quiet. 3 days ago, while Lily was in the ground, while she was down there tapping on wood, her parents had already been dead for 3 days. The calculation of that, the particular cruelty of the timeline, settled into Mason's chest like a stone. She's an orphan, he said. Yes, Reyes said quietly. Just that one word, but she said it in a way that told him she wasn't as untouched by this as her face suggested. Then she needs protection, Mason said. Serious protection, not a security guard in a hospital hallway. Whoever did this is going to know that she's alive and that she's talking. They buried her to silence her. When they find out it didn't work. We're aware, Reyes said. She's being moved to a secure location within the hour. She paused. Mr. Cole, I need to ask you something and I need a straight answer. Ask it. Do you have any information about the location of Thomas Vega that you're not sharing with me right now? No, Mason said, but I have a meeting scheduled with Garrett Bishop tonight. He's chapter president, Buckeye chapter. He's agreed to give me information about Vega and about the internal structure of whatever operation led to the Kowalski family being found. He held Reyes's gaze. I'm telling you about the meeting. I'm not asking for permission to go, but I'm telling you because if something goes wrong, someone should know where I am. Reyes stared at him for a full 5 seconds. You're going to walk into a meeting with the president of the Hells Angels Buckeye chapter in the middle of an active murder investigation, and you're telling me about it as a courtesy. I'm telling you about it because the information Garrett has could close this case faster than anything you can build from physical evidence, Mason said. And because I'm not the enemy here, I know it looks complicated given my background. But that little girl looked at me and asked if I was one of the men who killed her parents' detective. I am not, and I intend to prove that in the most complete way I know how. Reyes looked at him for another long moment. Then she picked up the journal. May I? It's why I brought it, Mason said. She opened it and began reading. He watched her face move through the pages, the careful neutrality slipping just slightly, just enough as she read things that clearly aligned with things she already knew, cross-referencing in real time, building her picture. After 10 minutes, she looked up. The name Carver, she said, federal IT contractor. Tommy Vega's brother-in-law, Mason said, under internal review for 6 months according to my source. Your source being Garrett Bishop. Yes. Who you're meeting tonight? Yes. Reyes closed the journal and set it down. She took a long breath. Then she said something that surprised him considerably. I want to put a wire on you for that meeting. He looked at her. If Bishop gives you information about Vega's current location or about the chain of events that led to the Kowalski deaths, we can use that. We can move on Vega before he runs. She met his eyes straight on. I know what I'm asking. I know what wearing a wire into that building means for a man with your background. I'm asking anyway because we're talking about 2 dead parents and a 7-year-old who spent 3 days in a wooden box. And if there's a chance we can put the right people away for this, that's more important than anyone's comfort level. Mason sat with that for a moment. The silence in the room was different from any silence he'd sat in before. It had weight. Then he said, you wire me and Garrett finds it and Garrett will look because Garrett always looks. Then I'm not just burned, it puts the whole meeting sideways. Garrett talks or he doesn't. He's not going to talk with a wire in the room. Reyes opened her mouth. But Mason said, I'll carry my phone, and I'll leave the call to your number running from the moment I step inside. Open line, you hear everything in real time. No recording that can be found, no device that can be swept. Just a phone in my pocket with a live connection. He looked at her. That work for you? Reyes held his gaze. Then slowly she nodded. That works. He stood up. Then I'll be in touch at 9 tonight. He was almost to the door when she spoke again. Mr. Cole? He turned. Lily asked about you again this morning, Reyes said. When the marshal came to brief the hospital staff about moving her, she asked if you were going to know where she was going. She paused. I told her I'd make sure you had a way to reach her. Something moved in Mason's chest that he didn't have a word for. He nodded once. Thank you, he said. He walked out into the morning and got into his truck and sat for a moment with his hands on the wheel. Lily's parents were dead. She had no one. Somewhere across this county, Tommy Vega was walking around with blood on his hands and a silver skull ring on his finger, and he thought he was untouchable. Mason started the truck. 9 hours until the warehouse. 9 hours to keep everything together, to keep thinking straight, to not let the rage that had been building quietly in the back of his chest since last night get ahead of him. Because rage made you stupid, and he could not afford to be stupid. Not now. Not with this much on the line. He drove back to the farm. He had work to do. The 9 hours did not pass slowly. That was the thing about dread, real dread, the kind with teeth. It didn't stretch time the way people assumed it would. It compressed it. Mason got back to the farm at 9:30 in the morning, and the next time he looked at a clock, it was already past 2 in the afternoon, and he had spent the hours in between doing the only thing that had ever reliably kept his mind from eating itself alive, working with his hands. He fixed the broken hinge on the barn door that he'd been putting off for 2 weeks. He restacked the firewood along the south wall of the shed. He walked the fence line on the west side of the property, the side that had nothing to do with the crime scene, the side where no deputy was parked and no tape was strung, and he checked each post by hand, shaking it, testing the wire, moving on. Methodical, repetitive, necessary. All the while his mind is running the warehouse meeting on a loop. Every angle, every possible version of how the night could go. He'd walked into difficult rooms before, rooms full of men who were unhappy with him for one reason or another, rooms where the outcome depended entirely on his ability to read the temperature and respond to it faster than the other side could move. He knew how to do this. The knowledge sat in him like muscle memory, something the body held on to long after the conscious mind tried to leave it behind. What he didn't know, what he couldn't calculate, was which version of Garrett Bishop was going to be in that warehouse tonight. There were 2 versions. There was Garrett, the leader, Dave, the man who had held the Buckeye chapter together for 15 years through federal pressure and internal politics, and the constant grinding attrition of that life. That Garrett was pragmatic. That Garrett understood when a situation had moved beyond the point where loyalty was an asset and become a liability. That Garrett would talk to Mason because it was the only move left that made any sense. And then there was Garrett, the president, the man who had built something and protected it for 15 years and would protect it with everything he had, including the willingness to make inconvenient problems disappear. That Garrett might decide that Mason Cole showing up at a police station with a journal and a locket and a direct line to the detective working a double homicide was a problem that needed to be managed before it got any larger. At 3:15, his phone rang, number he didn't recognize. He answered it anyway. Cole? Mr. Cole? A man's voice. Calm, professional, the particular flatness of federal law enforcement. This is Marshal Denton, U.S. Marshal Service. I understand you've been in contact with Detective Reyes regarding the Kowalski case. That's right, Mason said. I'd like to speak with you in person before end of day. I can come to your location. I have a prior commitment tonight, Mason said. Tomorrow morning works. A pause. Mr. Cole, this is a federal investigation into the deaths of 2 protected witnesses. I'd strongly encourage you to make yourself available today. I'm aware of the gravity of the situation, Mason said. I've already given Detective Reyes everything I have in my possession. She has a locket and the journal. She'll share them with you. Tomorrow morning, 8 o'clock, same station. I'll be there. Another pause. Longer. The sound of a man deciding whether to push. Is there something preventing you from meeting today? There's something I need to do tonight that I believe will give you more than anything I can tell you in an office, Mason said. Talk to Reyes. She'll explain. He hung up before Denton could find another angle. He didn't have time for federal jurisdictional positioning today. He had enough to manage. At 4 o'clock, he called the hospital and asked for the pediatric floor. The nurse told him that the patient he was asking about had been transferred and she wasn't able to provide any further information. He thanked her and hung up. Good. They'd moved Lily. She was somewhere safer, somewhere that Tommy Vega, or whoever was operating alongside him, couldn't easily reach. He sat with that for a moment, the relief of it, followed almost immediately by the thing he'd been carrying since the night before and hadn't fully examined yet, because every time he started to something urgent pushed it aside. He thought about Lily asking if he was coming. He thought about her hands on his shirt in those first 60 seconds after he lifted her out of the ground, the white-knuckled grip of a child who had decided on the basis of absolutely nothing except instinct that this particular person was safe. He thought about what it meant to be the only adult in a child's world, even temporarily, even accidentally. He pushed the thought aside. Not now, one thing at a time. At 5:30, he made himself eat something, eggs and toast, nothing complicated, and at 6, he went to the back bedroom and opened the closet again. He stood there looking at what was on the shelf where the metal box had been. He'd returned the journal to Reyes, which was right, but there were other things in that closet he hadn't thought about in a long time. Things from the old life kept not out of sentiment, but out of the same instinct that made men who'd been through certain things keep a fire extinguisher in every room, even 20 years after the fire. He reached up and took down the holster, checked the weapon inside it, a Glock 19 he'd owned legally since 2015. Registered, maintained, never used for anything except the occasional afternoon at the range when the need to hold something that required precision and focus became acute enough to act on. He checked the magazine, full. He considered it for a moment with the calm of a man who had long since made his peace with the fact that some situations called for certain tools. He put it on. At 8:55, he got in the truck. At 8:58, he dialed Reyes. She picked up on the first ring. Cole, I'm leaving now, 20-minute drive. I'll keep the line open from the moment I step inside. We have 2 units parked on Route 7, half a mile from the warehouse. They will not move unless I give the word. You have my word on that. I know, he said, and he did. He'd read her correctly in that interview room. She was the kind of person whose word meant what it was supposed to mean. One more thing. What if this goes sideways? He paused. Make sure Lily knows I wasn't one of them. A beat of silence. It's not going to go sideways, Reyes said. No, Mason agreed, but just in case. He drove. The Hennessy warehouse sat at the end of a gravel access road off Route 7, a building that had processed grain for 30 years before the family that owned it sold the business and couldn't find a buyer for the property. It had sat empty for the better part of a decade. Mason had been inside it exactly once about 15 years ago for a meeting that he'd spent the subsequent 15 years trying not to think about too carefully. Some rooms stayed with you regardless. He parked outside and sat for a moment. Then he reached into his jacket, found his phone, confirmed the call to Reyes was still connected, and slid it back into his breast pocket. He could feel the faint warmth of it against his chest next to where the locket had been. He got out of the truck and walked to the door and knocked 3 times. It opened almost immediately. A man he didn't recognize, young, broad, the particular build of someone whose job was to stand between other people and problems. He stepped aside without speaking. Mason went in. Garrett Bishop was standing in the middle of the warehouse floor, alone exactly as he'd promised. He looked older than Mason remembered, heavier in the face, the hair gone fully gray, the lines around his eyes cut deep. But the posture was the same. That specific way he held himself, grounded and still, like a man who had decided a long time ago exactly how much space in the world he was entitled to and had never apologized for taking it. Mason Cole, Garrett said. Not warm, not cold, somewhere in the middle, which was typical of him. Garrett. Mason walked toward him, stopped about 6 feet away, close enough to talk, far enough to think. You alone? I said I'd come alone. You also said a lot of things over the years that turned out to be approximate, Mason said. Something moved in Garrett's face. Almost amusement. Almost. Fair enough. He looked Mason over slowly, the jacket the slight bulk at the hip where the holster set the expression. You look like you haven't slept. I haven't, Mason said. Talk to me, Garrett. Garrett turned and walked to a wooden crate near the wall and sat on it, which brought him down from his full height and shifted the dynamic of the room slightly, a deliberate move Mason thought the kind of thing Garrett did when he wanted to signal that this was a conversation, not a confrontation. He'd always been smarter than people gave him credit for. 3 months ago, Garrett said, Tommy Vega came to me with information. He said he'd found out that there was a federal witness, someone who'd been involved in the case against our guys 2 years back, who had been relocated nearby. He said he'd gotten the information from someone inside the Marshall's contractor network. His brother-in-law. Carver, Mason said. Garrett looked at him. You did your homework. I had a good journal. Garrett nodded. Tommy said the witness was a risk, that even with the Ryko case falling apart, this person was still talking to federal agents, still feeding information. He said the club needed to act before the Bureau built a new case. And you said what? Mason asked. I said no. Garrett's voice went flat. I said absolutely not. We don't do that, Mason. Whatever else we are, we don't do that. I told Tommy to drop it, to stay away from the information, to tell his brother-in-law to keep his mouth shut, and thank God he hadn't already been caught. But Tommy didn't drop it, Mason said. No, Garrett said, he didn't. A long pause. Danny Rourke found out what Tommy was planning. He came to me privately 2 months ago. He said Tommy had gone to Priest with it, that Priest had agreed to help, and that they were already moving. He said he'd tried to talk Tommy out of it, and Tommy had told him to either get on board or get out of the way. And Danny chose the third option, Mason said quietly. Garrett looked at him. Danny came to me. He was going to help me stop it. We had a plan. We were going to go to Tommy together with enough pressure that he'd back down. But before we could do it, Danny ended up in the river, Mason said. Garrett didn't answer that directly. He didn't need to. Priest disappeared the same week. I don't know if Priest is dead or running. I genuinely don't know. And I didn't have proof of any of it. Nothing I could take to the police without burning the whole chapter along with Tommy. Nothing except Danny's word, and Danny was gone. Until a 7-year-old girl started tapping on the lid of a box buried in my field, Mason said. Until that, Garrett agreed. He looked down at his hands. I didn't know they'd taken the child, Mason. I want you to understand that. When you called me last night, I already knew the Kowalski family had been found. Someone in the county sheriff's department flagged it to the club as a heads up, trying to protect us from the blowback. But I didn't know about the girl. I didn't know she was alive. She was in the ground for 3 days, Mason said. His voice was very steady and very controlled. 3 days. Her parents were already dead when I pulled her out. Garrett closed his eyes briefly. When he opened them, something in them was different. I know. Why my feel, Garrett? Mason asked. Why there? Tommy knows exactly where I live. Garrett looked at him for a moment. Then he said, that's the part I need you to hear carefully because it changes things. Mason waited. Tommy didn't choose your property because he was trying to set you up, Garrett said. He chose it because he knew you, because he trusted, past tense, trusted that if something went wrong, if somehow that girl was found, the first name on the suspect list would be the former Hell's Angel on whose land she was buried. He paused. You were his insurance policy, Mason, not his target. That's a meaningful distinction that I'm sure would comfort me enormously if I were a less rational person, Mason said. Mason. Where is he, Garrett? Garrett looked at him steadily. If I tell you, what are you going to do? I'm going to give the information to Detective Reyes, Mason said, and the U.S. Marshal, who called me this afternoon and is going to be sitting in my living room tomorrow morning at 8 o'clock. And I'm going to testify to every single thing you've just told me in whatever court proceeding follows. And the club, Garrett asked. What happens to the club? The club's leadership cooperated with a federal investigation. The club's president provided information that directly led to the arrest of a member responsible for a double homicide and the attempted murder of a child. Mason held his gaze. That's the story, Garrett. That's the only story that keeps the rest of you out of a cell, and you know it. A long silence. The warehouse was very still around them. Mason could hear his own breathing. could feel the phone against his chest, Reyes on the other end of it, listening to every word. Then Garrett said, he's been staying at his cousin's place in Morrow County, town called Alderton. House on Brickfield Road. I don't have the number, but it's the only blue house on the left side going north. He's been there 4 days. Mason felt something release in his chest. Not relief exactly, more like the moment a rope that's been pulled very tight finally gets to go slack. Thank you, he said. Don't thank me, Garrett said. Just make sure they know I came to you, that this was cooperation. They'll know, Mason said. He turned to leave, got 3 steps toward the door. Then Garrett's voice came from behind him, quieter now, stripped of its official weight. Mason? He turned. Garrett was still sitting on the crate, and for a moment he looked exactly his age and all the weight of it. She gonna be okay, the girl. Mason thought about Lily, about her hands on his shirt, about the way she'd said, "Are my mom and dad coming to get me?" with those eyes that already knew the answer. No, he said honestly, not for a long time. Maybe not ever the way she was before, but she's alive. He held Garrett's gaze. That has to count for something. He walked out of the warehouse and into the cold air and put the phone to his ear. Reyes. I heard everything, she said. Her voice was controlled, professional, but underneath it something tight and urgent. Alderton, Morrow County, Brickfield Road, blue house on the left heading north. Yes. We're moving now, Mason. A pause. Get somewhere safe. Go home. I'm going home, he said. He got in the truck. His hands were on the wheel and they were still steady, still perfectly steady, and he sat with that for a moment, the strange paradoxical calm of a man who has just set an irreversible thing in motion and can do nothing now but wait for it to land. His phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number. He almost didn't open it. He opened it. It was 4 words. No name, no number, no way to trace it. 4 words that hit him like a physical impact and changed every calculation he had just made. She's not safe yet. He stared at the screen. Then another buzz. A second message from the same number. Vega didn't work alone. The third man isn't Priest. Priest has been dead for 6 weeks. The third man is someone you haven't thought of yet. Someone closer. Mason's hands, those steady hands, tightened on the steering piece until his knuckles went white. He called Reyes back immediately. She picked up mid-ring. Cole, what? Hold the Alderton move, he said. What, Mason? We have a location. I just got a text, unidentified number. It says Vega didn't work alone and the third man in that photograph is not Priest. It says Priest has been dead 6 weeks and the third man is someone I haven't considered. Silence on Reyes' end. Then, read me the exact text. He read it. Another silence. Who sent this? Reyes said. I don't know, Mason said. But whoever it is knew to text me right now, tonight, within 60 seconds of me walking out of that building. He paused. They're watching me, Reyes. Someone has been watching this whole thing. Don't move, Reyes said sharply. Stay exactly where you are. I'm sending a unit to your location right now. Reyes, stay where you are, Mason. He looked at the warehouse, at the dark around it, at the road that led back to Route 7, 2 lanes of blacktop cutting through flat country with nowhere to hide on either side. He thought about the text. Someone closer, closer than Priest, closer than Tommy. Someone whose name hadn't come up in any of his calculations, in any of his conversations, in anything Garrett had told him tonight. His mind moved through the people in this story. Every face, every voice, every person who knew where Mason Cole lived, who knew about the Kowalski case, who had been in a position to know enough to be dangerous. And then it stopped. And Mason felt a cold so complete it didn't feel like cold anymore. It felt like the absence of everything. He thought about Deputy Haynes, young wide-eyed at his door the night Lily was found. The deputy who had asked him very precise questions about his timeline and written everything down. The deputy who had been first on scene, first to see the crate, first to have the full picture before anyone else arrived. He thought about how Haynes had looked at his arm, at the tattoo, not with the casual curiosity of a young officer who'd never seen one before, with the specific recognition of someone who knew exactly what he was looking at. He thought about how Haynes had disappeared from the scene within an hour of arriving, turned everything over to Reyes, and hadn't appeared in any subsequent conversation. He thought about the text, Someone closer. Reyes, he said slowly. Deputy Haynes, what do you know about him? A pause. Haynes has been with the department 14 months. Transferred from Morrow County. She stopped. He heard her breath change. Morrow County. Where Tommy Vega has been hiding for 4 days, Mason said. The silence that followed lasted exactly 2 seconds. Then Reyes said, very quietly but with an edge in her voice like cut glass, do not go anywhere. Do not contact anyone. Lock your truck doors and do not open them for anyone except the officers I am sending to you right now. How long? Mason asked. 8 minutes, she said. 8 minutes, Mason, stay on the line. He locked the doors. He kept the phone at his ear. He watched the dark road and the dark fields on either side of it, and he thought about Lily and her safe location wherever it was, and he thought about whether Haynes knew where that location was, and whether the move had been coordinated before or after Haynes had gone off radar, and his chest went tight in a way that had nothing to do with fear for himself. Reyes, he said, the secure location where they moved Lily. Who authorized it? He heard her sharp intake of breath. Who authorized it? He said again. She was already talking to someone else. He could hear her voice clipped and rapid in the background. Then she came back to him. The transfer was coordinated through the department's family services liaison, she said. Approved by the shift supervisor at 6:15 this evening. Who was the shift supervisor? Mason asked. Another pause. Shorter this time. Haynes, she said. Mason's hand hit the door handle before his brain fully caught up with the decision. Mason, don't. He was already out of the truck. Reyes was still talking in his ear, but Mason had already made his decision, and the decision was the only thing that existed now. Mason, listen to me. You cannot go after Haynes alone. You don't even know where Lily is. Then find out, he said, moving fast toward his truck. Right now. Pull the transfer paperwork. Get me an address. I'm driving. You are not Mason. There are officers 8 minutes out. 8 minutes is 8 minutes too long if Haynes is already moving. He got in, started the engine, backed out of the gravel lot onto Route 7 in one hard motion. Get me the address, Reyes. That's all I need from you right now. He heard her exhale, sharp, frustrated, the sound of a professional being pushed past the boundary of what her training told her was acceptable. Then he heard her talking again, rapid and low to someone else on her end. A minute passed. He was already doing 70 on the county road, the dark fields blurring past on either side. Mason, her voice came back tight and controlled. The transfer paperwork lists a placement address on Garfield Street in Tanner's Mill. A family services safe house, Unit 7. A pause. I have units redirecting there now, but they're coming from Alderton. They're 12 minutes out minimum. I'm 6, Mason said. Mason. Stay on the line, he said. Don't hang up. He drove the way he hadn't driven in 12 years, not recklessly, not with anger, but with that cold, channeled precision that the old life had built into him, and that the farm life had never fully dismantled. Every turn anticipated, every decision made a half second before it needed to be. His mind was running clean and fast, stripped of everything except the problem in front of him. He thought about Haynes. 14 months on the force, transferred from Morrow County, the same county where Tommy Vega had been hiding. First on scene the night Lily was found. In a position as shift supervisor to control where she was moved, and who knew about it? The anonymous text had said someone closer. Not a biker. Not a man with tattoos and a leather vest. A man with a badge, which was so much worse because badges opened doors that everything else kept shut. The question that was burning in the back of his mind, the one he couldn't answer yet, was whether Haynes was working with Vega or working for someone above Vega. Because what the text had also said was that the operation had a third man who wasn't Priest. And if Haynes was the third man, then this wasn't just a club problem anymore. This was something that went deeper than the Hells Angels, deeper than a Ryko case, deeper than 3 bikers making a catastrophically wrong decision. This was organized. This was protected. This had been running for a long time. His headlights swept across the turn for Tanner's Mill. He took it at speed and came into the small residential area doing 40 slowing as he found Garfield Street. The safe house was a plain building, the kind that was designed to look like every other building on the block. Nothing distinctive, nothing memorable. Unit 7 was on the ground floor end of the row. The lights were on inside. He parked half a block down and got out quietly, the phone still in his hand. I'm on Garfield, he said quietly. Lights are on in Unit 7. No vehicles I recognize. Mason, do not go in. I'm not going in, he said. I'm going to the window first. Just listen. He moved along the building wall, staying out of the spill of light from the windows. He reached the edge of the window for Unit 7 and stopped pressing himself flat against the wall and listened. Voices inside. Two of them. One was Haynes. He recognized the cadence, even through the wall, that careful, measured way the deputy spoke, which Mason now understood was not the calm of a professional, but the control of a man who was always performing. The other voice was smaller, higher. Lily. She was talking back to him. Mason couldn't make out the words, but the tone was wrong, not the cautious trust she'd extended to Mason, not even the frightened silence of a child with strangers. Something harder. Something that sounded impossibly like defiance. He moved to the door. He didn't knock. He tried the handle, first locked, and then he stepped back and put his shoulder into it, the way he'd put his shoulder into 100 doors over the years, and it gave on the second hit, the frame splitting the door, swinging inward. Haynes spun around. He was standing in the middle of the room and his hand was moving toward his hip, and Mason's voice came out hard and flat and absolutely without room for negotiation. Don't. Haynes froze. His hand stopped moving. Lily was on the small couch against the wall. She was still in hospital clothes, a thin blanket around her shoulders, and when Mason came through the door, her face went through three expressions. In about 1 second, shock, recognition, and then something that broke his heart with how much relief was in it. Mason, she said. I've got you, he said. He didn't take his eyes off Haynes. I've got you, Lily. Stay where you are. Haynes recovered faster than Mason expected. That was the thing about men who had been operating in deception for a long time. They were good at pivoting. Mr. Cole, he said with a steadiness that was almost impressive. You just broke into a law enforcement safe house. I'd strongly encourage you to... Where's the family services worker? Mason said. The transfer paperwork should have had a caseworker assigned. Where are they? A beat, just a fraction of a second too long. They stepped out. Lily, Mason said. Was there anyone else here when you arrived, besides this man? Lily shook her head, immediately, no hesitation. There was supposed to be a woman, Mason said, not to Lily, back to Haynes. A Ms. Dawson or an assigned replacement. The family services liaison doesn't transfer a minor to a safe house without a caseworker present. That's protocol. He took one step forward. You brought her here alone, which means this isn't a safe house transfer. This is a pickup. Something changed in Haynes's face. The performance dropped not completely, but enough. Enough that Mason could see underneath it to the thing that had been there all along. Not a young deputy over his head, a man who had made a series of deliberate choices and had been, until about 45 seconds ago, completely certain he was going to get away with them. Cole, Haynes said. His voice dropped its professional register. It went flat and cold. You don't understand what you're walking into. I understand more than you think, Mason said. Tommy Vega, Leonard Kowalski, your brother-in-law's access to the Marshall's contractor network. He watched Haynes's eyes. I know Priest has been dead for 6 weeks. I know you're the third man in that photograph. I know you've been running Vega for at least a year, feeding him locations, making evidence disappear. And I know that whatever you're planning to do with this child tonight, it ends right now. For a long moment, nobody moved. The room held itself completely still, the way rooms do when the thing that's about to happen hasn't happened yet and everybody knows it. Then Haynes said, You're not a cop, Cole. You're an ex-felon on parole. I'm not on parole, Mason said. Clean record since 2013, as I'm sure you know, since you clearly did your homework on me before Tommy picked my field. He held his ground, and my phone has been connected to Detective Reyes for the last 40 minutes. She's heard everything. So have the officers who are about 4 minutes from this door right now. Haynes looked at the phone in Mason's hand, looked at his face, made his calculation. And then he ran, not for the broken front door, for the back, which Mason couldn't cover alone. He moved faster than his build suggested, and he was through the back hallway before Mason had taken 3 steps. Mason stopped. He did not chase him, because Lily was in the room, and Lily was alone. And leaving Lily alone, even for 60 seconds, even to chase down the man who'd brought her here, was not something Mason Cole was willing to do. He went to the couch and sat beside her and put his arm around her shoulders and felt her lean into him with the full weight of her exhaustion. And he kept his eyes on the broken front door and his phone in his hand, and he waited. He told me we were going somewhere safer, Lily said. Her voice was very quiet. I didn't believe him. How did you know not to believe him? Mason asked. She thought about it. He smiled too much, she said. When grown-ups smile too much, it means they want something. Mason was quiet for a moment. That's very smart, he said. My dad told me that, she said. The room went very still with that. He heard the sirens 2 minutes later, and the first officers through the broken door came in with weapons drawn, which was correct procedure in which Mason responded to by putting both hands up immediately and stating his name and Reyes's name in a clear, calm voice. The officers moved to him and to Lily, and within 30 seconds the room was controlled, and the back of the building was covered, and a voice on a radio was reporting that a suspect was in foot pursuit heading east on the access road behind Garfield Street. Reyes arrived 7 minutes after that. She came through the door and looked at Mason sitting on the couch with Lily against his side, and she stood there for just a moment, taking it in before her professional composure fully reassembled itself, and she moved toward them. She's okay, Mason said before Reyes could ask. Reyes looked at Lily. Lily looked back at her with those steady two old eyes. Are you hurt? Reyes asked her. No, Lily said. Okay. Reyes' voice was gentle in a way that didn't seem performed. Okay, sweetheart. You're safe now. Lily said nothing, but her hand found Mason's forearm, not the hand on the tattooed side, the other one, and her fingers closed around it, and she held on. They got Haynes 40 minutes later. A state trooper found him on foot on Route 9, 2 miles east of Tanner's Mill, moving through a cornfield on what turned out to be a route that would have taken him directly to a barn, where when they searched it 3 hours later, they found a vehicle registered to a shell company, 2 prepaid phones, $40,000 in cash, in a bag packed for a long trip. He hadn't been running scared. He'd had an exit strategy built and waiting, the kind of preparation that told its own story about how long this had been in motion. Tommy Vega was picked up from the Alderton address at 11:17 that night. He didn't run. Reyes told Mason later that when the officers came through the door, Vega was sitting at a kitchen table eating cereal and watching television, and he put his hands up before they even told him to, and the first thing he said was, I've been waiting for this. The silver skull ring was on his right hand exactly where Lily had described it. In the weeks that followed, the picture that emerged from the investigation was bigger and uglier than Mason had let himself imagine. Haynes had been recruited by a federal organized crime unit that had been running a rogue operation, officially sanctioned investigation, that had somewhere in the middle of its long history curdled into something that protected its informants by eliminating threats instead of managing them through legitimate channels. Carver Vega's brother-in-law had been both the access point and the fall guy, a mid-level contractor who'd been pressured into providing location data for protected witnesses through a combination of money and threats that the investigation would eventually characterize as coercion. Priest was found 3 weeks after Haynes' arrest, buried on a property outside Clarksburg, 200 yards from the river where Danny Rourke had died. They had both been killed by the same weapon. The ballistics report made that very clear. The case that unraveled from all of it took 8 months and filled a filing cabinet that when Reyes described it to Mason over the phone one afternoon in the middle of the following spring, she said required a dedicated storage room because the paper alone weighed more than she did. Mason gave 4 separate depositions. He testified in 2 hearings. He told the truth every single time, the complete unvarnished truth, the way he'd learned to tell it, not to protect himself, not to manage the damage, just to say exactly what happened, in the order that it happened, and let the people whose job it was to sort out the consequences do their work. Garrett Bishop cooperated fully with federal investigators and was granted a plea arrangement that kept him out of prison on the basis of substantial assistance and the fact that no evidence ever emerged linking him personally to the Kowalski deaths. It was the closest thing to justice available in a situation where the lines had been blurred by too many years of people choosing expedience over principle. Tommy Vega pled guilty to 2 counts of murder in the first degree and 1 count of attempted murder. He received 3 consecutive life sentences. He said nothing at sentencing. He kept his eye on the table the whole time. And the silver skull ring was gone because they had taken it into evidence and it was sitting in a bag in a labeled box somewhere, which Mason thought was exactly where it belonged. Haynes went to trial. It lasted 11 days. The jury was out for 6 hours. Guilty on all counts. Through all of it, the depositions, the hearings, the phone calls with Reyes, the long drives to county courthouses, Mason came back every time to the farm. To the east field where the tape came down after 3 weeks and the ground was eventually smoothed over and the grass grew back slowly, the way ground always recovered if you gave it time. He worked the farm and he kept the silence that he'd built around himself over 12 years, and he let the story settle into him the way hard things settled when you didn't fight them. And he drove to the placement facility in Columbus every second Saturday. Without fail. The facility was a good one, a group home run by a nonprofit small enough to feel like something other than an institution, with a director named Patricia, who had been doing this work for 22 years, and who had in Mason's assessment one of those rare souls that people spent their whole lives hoping to encounter. She met him the first Saturday in the parking lot and looked him over the way people always did, the size of the tattoo, the face that carried its history in every line. And then she said, "Lily talks about you every single day. I hope you understand what that means." He hadn't. Not fully. Not yet. He understood it more as the Saturdays accumulated. As Lily went from the child who barely spoke and held herself very still and watched every adult in every room with that devastating watchfulness, to the child who came running when she heard his truck in the parking lot, who talked the entire walk from the parking lot to the picnic table in the side yard, who one afternoon brought him a drawing she'd done in art class and held it out to him without saying anything. And when he looked at it, he saw that it was a farm with a field and a barn and a figure standing in the field that was clearly meant to be him. He kept it, folded carefully in his wallet. On a Thursday afternoon in November, 14 months after the night he dug her out of the ground, Mason sat in Patricia's office and signed the paperwork that he'd been working toward for the better part of a year, the paperwork that his attorney had helped him prepare, that the court had reviewed and approved, that Reyes had written a letter in support of, that Mr. Dawson had advocated for in 2 separate hearings, the foster placement order, temporary with a pathway to permanency. His hand was steady when he signed it. It was always steady. Lilith was waiting in the hallway outside the office. She knew what the meeting was about. Patricia had prepared her carefully and honestly, the way you prepared children for things that mattered. When Mason came out, she was standing very straight with her hands clasped in front of her, and she looked at his face the way she always looked at his face, that complete unfiltered evaluation that she'd been doing since the first night he'd lifted her out of the dark. He crouched down to her level. He looked at her directly. "Ready to see the farm?" he asked. Lily Kowalski looked at Mason Cole, at the weathered face and the blurred tattoo and the steady hands and the eyes that had never once looked at her as anything other than someone worth fighting for, and she said, "I've been ready." He stood up. She took his hand, and they walked out together into the November light, and Mason Cole, who had spent 12 years building a quiet life at the edge of everything he used to be, understood finally what the quiet had been for. It had been waiting, the same way the field had waited, the same way the ground always waited, patient and dark and full of things that needed to be brought back into the light. He had been the right man in the right field on the right afternoon. And that was enough. That was more than enough. That was everything.